In a small, tranquil village, a young woman named Leila grew up in a world where the lines between family and deception blurred. Her stepmother, a woman of pride and judgment, often belittled her father, calling him weak and insignificant in front of Leila. Little did she know, the man she looked down upon was far more than he appeared. Behind his quiet demeanor was a hidden past, one that could shatter everything they thought they knew. As Leila uncovered the truth, the family's world would never be the same again. Leila had always believed her father was just an ordinary man. Ahmad was a quiet, reserved person, often spending his days working at his small workshop or tending to the garden. He never spoke much about his past, and Leila never questioned it. Her stepmother, Miriam, frequently belittled Ahmad, criticizing him for not being more ambitious and always suggesting that he should be doing something more meaningful with his life. "Why don't you do something worthy of respect?" Miriam would say with a dismissive tone. Ahmad's responses were always gentle, almost apologetic. He never seemed to defend himself against Miriam's biting remarks, and Leila, growing up in this environment, began to adopt her stepmother's view. She saw him as a passive man who had settled into mediocrity and never tried to change his circumstances. Miriam often took the lead in all family decisions, and Ahmad meekly followed along. Leila couldn't understand why her father didn't stand up for himself more. Why didn't he defend his honor, or at least speak up when Miriam criticized him so harshly? Miriam's influence over the household grew stronger each day, and Leila began to feel as though her father was a mere shadow of what a man should be. She knew her stepmother had a much stronger personality, but it never occurred to Leila that there could be more to her father than what met the eye. Ahmad had never been openly confrontational, nor had he ever shown any outward signs of leadership. To Leila, he was simply the quiet man who went along with Miriam's harsh judgments. Despite Miriam's harsh words, there was always a certain kind of peace in their home. Every day, Ahmad would go to work, returning with a tired but content smile, always with a gentle word for Leila, always showing her kindness. As time passed, Leila began to notice small things that didn't quite add up. For example, how did her father always manage to get things done, despite his humble work? How did they manage to live so comfortably with such little financial strain? These questions lingered in Leila's mind but remained unanswered, as she never dared to ask. Her relationship with her father was loving, but distant, clouded by Miriam's dominance over their lives. Miriam never hesitated to remind Leila how lucky they were to have everything they needed, as though Ahmad's quiet work behind the scenes had no significant role to play. Leila was confused by her father's behavior, wondering why he allowed Miriam to belittle him in front of her. Why didn't he assert himself? She had no idea that this question would soon unravel a deep secret, one that would change everything about their family dynamic. The fractured perception. One evening, as Leila was returning from the market, she overheard a conversation between Ahmad and a man who had come to visit the house. Leila, coming back from the street, paused by the window, unnoticed. She could hear the men talking in hushed tones, and something about their exchange intrigued her. The man, who sounded confident and authoritative, called Ahmad by a different name, one she had never heard before. Leila couldn't believe her ears. She leaned in closer, straining to hear. The man referred to her father as Commander Ahmad in a way that sounded full of respect. It was a far cry from the meek man Leila knew. The words commander and military echoed in her mind. She was so stunned by what she had heard that she barely noticed when the conversation ended. The visitor left the house quietly, and Ahmad returned to his routine, seemingly unaware that Leila had overheard the exchange. Leila was left confused, wondering if she had imagined what she'd heard. Why would someone call her father Commander Ahmad? Was he really someone else? A part of her refused to believe it. Ahmad was a simple man. He didn't wear uniforms, nor did he speak with authority. He was just her father, a quiet and reserved man who didn't share much about his past. However, a deep curiosity began to take root in Leila's heart, and she resolved to uncover the truth about this mysterious side of her father. That night, while Miriam was busy preparing dinner, Leila decided to search through some old boxes of family documents in the attic. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she had a feeling that the truth was hidden somewhere. As she sifted through dusty papers and old photographs, she stumbled upon a series of letters and military awards. The documents were dated years ago, when Ahmad was much younger. The letters revealed that her father had been involved in significant military operations, and he had once held a respected rank in a renowned army. There, hidden among these old papers, Leila discovered a photograph of Ahmad in a military uniform, standing alongside other high-ranking officers. Her heart raced as she realized that the man she had always seen as a humble, quiet individual was once someone of great importance. She continued to read through the letters, uncovering more about his past, how he had served his country with distinction, receiving accolades and praise for his bravery. The man she had known her whole life was not just a humble craftsman. He had been a decorated officer, someone with a past that had been buried and concealed from everyone, even Miriam. After Leila's discovery of Ahmad's military uniform and the letters from his past, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to her father's story than she had ever imagined. The more she reflected on what she had uncovered, the more questions arose. Why had her father never spoken of his past? Why had he chosen to live a life of silence, away from the recognition and respect he deserved? Most importantly, why had Miriam, her stepmother, never known about Ahmad's true identity? The idea that her father had once been a prominent figure, a respected officer in the military, baffled Leila. He had spent so many years living in a quiet, humble house, working on his craft and rarely speaking of his past. His humility, which had always been a part of him, now seemed to mask a history of courage, power, and responsibility. As she looked through the letters and photographs, she began to piece together a version of her father she had never known. Ahmad had been a man who had seen battle, made decisions that affected the lives of others, and earned medals of honor for his bravery. But Leila's revelation didn't stop there. As she delved deeper into the documents, she found something that further shocked her, a letter, written in her father's own hand, addressed to someone named Zain. The letter spoke of a mission that Ahmad had been involved in, a covert operation that had taken place many years ago. The letter revealed the critical role Ahmad had played in ensuring the safety of countless lives during a time of conflict. But what really struck Leila was the mention of Zain. Who was this person? Why was Ahmad writing to them after all these years? The letter was filled with emotions that Leila had never seen in her father before: longing, affection, and even regret. As she read the words, it became clear to her that Ahmad's past was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Leila couldn't help but wonder how her mother, Miriam, could have been so blind to her husband's true nature. Why had he kept such a secret from her? How could Miriam have married a man who had so much more to his story than she knew? It seemed that their entire relationship was built on a lie that had been hidden from Miriam for so long. She was left with so many questions, but one thing became clear: Ahmad had chosen to bury his past for reasons only he knew, and Miriam had never sought to uncover the truth. As Leila walked back downstairs, she felt a growing tension in her chest. The burden of this newfound knowledge weighed heavily on her. Her mother, Miriam, had always belittled Ahmad, and Leila had quietly accepted it, believing the insults were warranted. But now, she had to face the reality that the man her mother had constantly ridiculed had been someone far greater than she could ever have imagined. The quiet, unassuming father she had known all her life had been a hero in his own right. The hidden truth about Ahmad's past. Leila decided to confront her father about the letters she had found. She couldn't carry this knowledge alone any longer, and she knew that it was time for her father to explain everything. She waited until evening, when Ahmad was resting in his study, his usual sanctuary away from the demands of the house. She knocked softly on his door, and after a brief pause, she entered. Ahmad looked up from his work, his eyes tired but warm. Leila hesitated for a moment, but the words she had rehearsed seemed to escape her. Instead, she handed him the letter she had found earlier. Ahmad took the letter from her hands with a calm, steady gaze. He didn't speak immediately, but Leila could see the hesitation in his eyes. He knew this day would come, the day when his secret would finally be revealed. "Father, why didn't you ever tell me?" Leila asked quietly. "Why didn't you tell Miriam about this part of your life?" Ahmad sighed deeply, sitting back in his chair. The years of keeping his past hidden were finally catching up with him, and he knew that he could no longer live in silence. He looked at Leila with a mixture of regret and understanding. "There are things in life that we choose to leave behind," Ahmad said softly. "Some stories are too painful to revisit, and some truths can change everything. When I married Miriam, I wanted to be a different man. I didn't want her to know about my past because I thought it would create a distance between us. I believed that by letting go of that life, I could have peace. But now, I realize that peace comes with honesty." Leila listened intently, absorbing every word. Ahmad went on to explain how he had left his military career behind after a harrowing mission that had left him scarred emotionally and physically. The person he had been, the strong, respected officer, had no place in the quiet life he had wanted to build with Miriam. He had left that part of himself in the past, convinced that it would be easier to live a simpler life without the shadows of war hanging over him. "I wanted to protect you both," Ahmad continued. "I wanted you to live a life free from the dangers and burdens of my past. But I see now that I've made a mistake in keeping it hidden. You deserve to know who I really am." Leila was overwhelmed with a mix of emotions: shock, admiration, and even guilt. She had never understood the weight her father had carried for so long. She had never realized the sacrifices he had made to protect his family from his past. The days following Ahmad's revelation were filled with both silence and contemplation. Leila found herself reflecting on everything she had learned, her perception of her father completely transformed. The man she had once viewed as meek and quiet now stood before her as a man of resilience, sacrifice, and strength. His silence, once a sign of passivity, now made sense to her. It had been a choice born of love, not weakness. Ahmad had buried his past to protect his family, to shield them from the danger and trauma that accompanied his former life. But now, Leila knew that this secret had weighed on him heavily, a burden he could no longer carry alone. The truth had to be shared with Miriam, who had never once questioned her husband's past. In all the years they had been married, Miriam had never thought to ask about Ahmad's life before her. His reluctance to talk about it only fueled her belief that he was nothing more than an ordinary man. Miriam's judgments had always been harsh, often undermining Ahmad's quiet nature, but now, Leila realized that it was her stepmother's ignorance that had kept her from understanding him. Leila approached the subject carefully, knowing that the revelation of her father's past would stir a range of emotions. Miriam's pride and her years of dismissing Ahmad would likely cause her to resist this new truth. But Leila had no choice but to confront her stepmother. The bond of trust between them was fractured, and the truth, no matter how painful, could no longer be ignored. It was late one evening when Leila sat down with her stepmother, her heart pounding with anticipation. Miriam was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, the rhythmic sounds of chopping vegetables filling the silence between them. Leila hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Mother, there's something I need to tell you," Leila said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Miriam looked up, pausing in her task. She set the knife down and gestured for Leila to continue, sensing the gravity in her daughter's tone. "What is it, dear?" Miriam asked, her voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Leila took a deep breath. "It's about father, about his past." Miriam furrowed her brows. "What about his past? You know he doesn't talk about it. He's always been a quiet man." Leila stood up, walking over to the small chest where she had found the letters and photographs that had revealed her father's secret. She carefully opened it and retrieved the letter she had found earlier, the one addressed to someone named Zain. Leila handed it to Miriam, her heart racing as her stepmother took the letter with trembling hands. Miriam unfolded the paper and began to read. As she read the words, her expression changed from confusion to disbelief, and finally to shock. Leila could see her stepmother's body tense as the truth began to sink in. Miriam's hands shook as she looked up from the letter, her face pale. What is this?" Miriam stammered, her voice shaky. "Why didn't he tell me about this? Why didn't he tell me about Zain?" Leila took a step forward, her voice soft yet firm. "Father wasn't always the man you know. He wasn't just a simple craftsman. He was a commander in the military, someone who served his country with honor and distinction. He chose to leave that life behind to protect us, to give us a life without the dangers of his past. But you, Mother, never knew about it. You never asked, and now you're learning the truth." Miriam's eyes filled with tears as the weight of the revelation hit her. For years, she had mocked Ahmad for being passive, for not living up to the image of the strong, ambitious man she had wanted him to be. She had failed to see the depth of his character, the sacrifice he had made to protect their family. Now, Miriam was forced to confront the reality of what she had done. Her judgment had been misplaced, and her disrespect had been unwarranted. Leila could feel the tension in the room, the shock of the truth settling over them both. Miriam, unable to speak, turned and walked out of the room, leaving Leila standing alone with her thoughts. Leila knew this moment would change everything. The relationship between her mother and father, built on years of unspoken assumptions, would never be the same again. Later that evening, Leila found her father sitting alone in the garden, looking up at the stars. The calmness of the night seemed to reflect his inner peace, a peace he had longed for but had never fully attained. Leila joined him, sitting beside him on the old stone bench. "Father," she said softly, "Mother knows now. She knows everything." Ahmad didn't look at her, but he nodded slowly, as if he had anticipated this moment for a long time. "I knew it would come to this," he replied quietly. "I knew the truth would eventually be revealed, and when it was, I would have to face the consequences." Leila reached out and took her father's hand. "She's in shock, but she'll understand. You did this for us, for all of us. You protected us by keeping your past hidden. You didn't want her to know because you didn't want her to worry. You didn't want us to be affected by your history." Ahmad's gaze softened, and he smiled faintly. "It wasn't just about protecting you. It was about protecting her. Miriam couldn't have known the full truth. She wouldn't have understood the sacrifices I had to make. But now she does." As they sat in silence, the weight of the revelation settled over them both. The family was about to change. The truth had been revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. But Leila felt a sense of understanding and acceptance, knowing that her father had made the right decision, even if it had cost him a lifetime of silence. The days after the revelation of Ahmad's past were filled with an air of tension and uncertainty. Leila watched as Miriam struggled to come to terms with the truth about her husband's past, the life she had never known about. The deep shock Miriam felt was not just about the military past Ahmad had hidden, but the realization that her judgments about him had been completely wrong. She had spent years criticizing and belittling the man she loved without truly understanding who he was. Miriam's pride had been her downfall. Her belief that Ahmad's quiet nature made him weak had clouded her judgment for years. She had never questioned why Ahmad never spoke about his past. Now, facing the painful truth, Miriam found herself grappling with feelings of guilt and regret. She had never realized that her husband had been a hero, that he had sacrificed so much for their safety. Leila could see how deeply Miriam was affected, and although she felt some sympathy for her, Leila couldn't help but feel angry at the years of disrespect Ahmad had endured. Leila's relationship with her stepmother had always been strained, but now the tension between them reached new heights. Miriam, once confident in her superiority, now seemed fragile, her pride shattered by the truth. Leila found it difficult to look at her stepmother without remembering the hurtful words she had often spoken to Ahmad. The woman who had once held all the power in their home now appeared vulnerable and remorseful, a far cry from the Miriam Leila had known. Despite her inner conflict, Leila knew that the truth could not be ignored. She had to give her stepmother the opportunity to understand and make amends for the mistakes she had made. Leila had spent years feeling torn between her loyalty to her father and her love for Miriam, but now she saw the stark reality. Her father had always been the true strength in their family, and Miriam's ignorance had led to years of unnecessary conflict. It wasn't long before Miriam approached Ahmad, her face pale with guilt. She had spent several days trying to process the information, trying to come to terms with the man she had thought she knew. Ahmad, who had always been patient and understanding, listened quietly as Miriam spoke, her words laced with remorse. "I had no idea," Miriam said, her voice trembling. "All these years, I've made you feel small, like you were nothing. I never understood the kind of man you really are. I never thought to ask, and now I see everything I've done wrong." Ahmad, who had been patiently waiting for this moment, finally spoke. "Miriam, you don't need to apologize. I never wanted you to know about my past. I never wanted you to feel burdened by it. I chose this life because I thought it would be better for all of us. But the truth is, I should have told you. You deserved to know who I was. I'm not a man who is ashamed of his past. I am who I am because of what I've been through. But I didn't want to bring that into our lives. I wanted peace." Miriam, overwhelmed with emotion, reached out and took Ahmad's hand. For the first time in years, she saw him as the man he truly was, not just her quiet husband, but a man who had been through so much and sacrificed his own identity to protect her and their family. "I never knew," Miriam whispered. "All these years, I was so proud, so sure of myself. But now I understand why you never said anything. You didn't want to burden me with the weight of your past. You've always been a protector, even when I didn't see it. I'm so sorry for everything I said." Ahmad didn't speak for a moment, his gaze softening. "It's all right. I never blamed you. You couldn't have known. But now that you do, we can move forward. I've carried this burden alone for too long. It's time for us to heal, together." The reconciliation between Ahmad and Miriam was not instantaneous, but over time, they began to rebuild their relationship on a foundation of honesty and understanding. Miriam's pride had been replaced by humility, and she realized that her criticism of Ahmad had been rooted in her own fears and insecurities. She had judged him harshly because of her own doubts, but now she saw him for who he truly was, a man of strength, honor, and love. As for Leila, she found herself navigating a new dynamic in her relationship with her stepmother. While Miriam's remorse was genuine, Leila couldn't easily forgive the years of mistreatment her father had endured. She had always loved her father, but now she saw him in a new light. He had been the quiet backbone of their family, enduring more than anyone could have imagined. Leila's respect for him grew even stronger, and she began to understand the depth of the sacrifices he had made for their well-being. The truth, though painful, had brought the family closer together. Ahmad no longer had to live in silence, and Miriam no longer had to live in ignorance. The weight of the past had been lifted, and the family could finally move forward, no longer held back by the secrets that had once divided them. The new beginning for the family. With the truth out in the open, Ahmad, Miriam, and Leila found themselves at a crossroads. The years of silence, distrust, and misunderstanding were behind them, and they were left with the task of rebuilding their family dynamic. The past could never be erased, but it could be understood, and with that understanding came a new sense of unity. Ahmad, once the silent figure in their household, now found a voice to share his story. Miriam, who had spent so long judging him, began to see him with new eyes, appreciating the man he had always been. And Leila, who had been torn between loyalty to her father and love for her stepmother, now understood the complexity of their relationship. The family was stronger for having faced the truth. The lessons they learned from Ahmad's hidden past became the foundation of their future, and the bonds that had once been frayed were now repaired. The truth had not only set Ahmad free but had also given Miriam and Leila the clarity they needed to move forward together. The journey was difficult, but it was one that ultimately brought the family closer than they had ever been.